Welcome to Tabletop Gaming Guild. Tabletop Gaming Guild is all about the experience and memories that playing tabletop games with friends and families can create. Today we'll be looking at 878 Viking, designed by Bo Beckett, Dave Kimmel, and Jeff Stahl, and published by Academy Games. The year is 865. A great heathen host of Norsemen have landed in East Anglia and are poised to thunder across England. For the past 72 years, Viking raiding parties from Norway and England has terrorized the coast of England with hit-and-run attacks. The treasures and plunders gained from these attacks have drawn thousands of eager Norsemen seeking glory and riches. These Viking warriors are now set to strike the heartland of a divided and unprepared England. They are no longer interested in just raiding. They are now set to settle and rule the lands they just conquered. The Vikings are coming. That synopsis pretty much sums up the feel of 878 Viking. In it, two players will play as the Viking raiding parties, trying to conquer large swaths of England, and two players will be playing as the English factions, trying to hold off and fight back against the Vikings. Let's give a brief overview of the general rules to give you a concept how this game is played. First off, the setup is as follows. The English will start with a certain number of units on the map, which is marked on the map where they start, plus you get to take 4 extra units for each faction and place them where you want. The Vikings will not start on the board, but they will have one leader with a bunch of units on it that is going to start off the board, and when the first player goes, which is on the first round is always the black player, they will start invading from the North Sea. A turn goes as follows. First, you reinforce. For the Vikings, that means you draw a leader if you haven't already drawn one this round, and take the assigned number of warriors and put it on that leader. If you are English, that means all these spaces on the board that have your specific color marked on them, they're still in English control, get an extra unit on them. After that, if any of your units have retreated in a previous turn, say you had this one person in this retreated area that had fled from a battle, he would then go into an area you control. Next, you would pick a card to play. In this case, the black player could choose this movement card, which allows them to move 2 armies. Each army can move 3 spaces. An army can be an army on a leader, or any group of units in one single location. If you choose to move a leader, that leader moves first before any movement or combat. So, I have 3 movements. I could potentially invade from the North Sea, go here, fight these units. If I'm successful, I can continue on. However, if that combat takes more than one round, each round it takes subtracts 1 from my movement. Once the leader's movement and combat is complete, I could then move additional units. However, I can never move the same units that I've already moved, and I can never see the number of armies listed here. One advantage to leaders is they can pick up and drop off units as they go, and they can do multiple attacks. Whereas if I was attacking with an army, which is groups of units without a leader, if I encounter the enemy, that is the end of their movement, and they immediately do combat. So let's look at how battles work. First off, I am in a province that has a major city. So the English would have an option to recruit from the local militia. If they choose to, they would draw one of these yellow cards and get that many yellow units. Let's say we got these 5 units. Once that is decided, the defenders, that's a person who's not the active player, get to collect their dice and roll them. Each color has a maximum number of dice, so it doesn't matter that I have 5 yellow. I only get yellow's maximum of 2 dice. Green, and then I'd get 2 green dice. There's no blue present in this province, so I would not get any blue dice. I would then roll and resolve. First, we resolve each hit. For each hit you roll, the opponent has to choose 1 unit to lose. Then you resolve any flee. You have to remove 1 unit matching the color rolled and put it in the fleeing section on the board. However, if that unit happens to be yellow, since these are militia that do not remain from round to round. It just comes off the board entirely. Lastly, you will resolve commands. So a command means you take a unit of the matching color and retreat to an adjacent province that you control. We would then roll for the Vikings. Now I'd only roll for units that are remaining, and I could only roll as many dice as exist for that faction. Once a round of combat is resolved, you would keep going until there are no longer opposing factions in that province. Once all battles are complete, the active player would then draw back up to 3 cards. If in their hand they do not have any cards that allow for movement, they would shuffle that back into their draw pile and draw a set of 3 fresh cards. That signals the end of that player's turn, and you would draw from the bag a dice to indicate who's the next player. Once all 4 factions have gone, you would remove all the dice from the turn order track, put them back in the bag, and the pawn will go to the next round. Once we get to the 5th round, the English now unlock Alfred the Great, giving them their only leader. So that's the gist of the game. There's a few other things to mention. One is event cards. They're pretty straightforward. They basically tell you when they can be played and what their effects are. The other thing to talk about is how the game ends. So as the Vikings take control of provinces, they are going to be placing down these control tokens. Those control tokens remain as long as they have at least 1 unit in that province. If they ever leave, it reverts to English control. If the Vikings ever have 14 or more of these tokens on the board, they win at the end of the round. If they ever go back to 0 control tokens on the map, they lose. The game can also end in a treaty. Each faction has 1 treaty card in their deck, and this doubles as a movement card. If they ever play it, it goes into the treaty section. And from the 5th turn onward, at the end of each round, you will look at the treaty section, and if both treaty cards from one side have been revealed, you would then end the game, and the Vikings would win if they control 9 or more provinces. The English would win if the Vikings control fewer than 9 provinces. So hopefully that gives you a gist of how the game is played. Now, I would consider this a light war game, but complexity is very subjective. From a non-war gamer, this could be considered a moderate to heavy game. The rules are relatively short, only being 10 pages in length, and they're not too complex. However, there were some elements of it that I felt were put in to make it more attractive to non-war gamers, and sometimes that work to the detriment of the game. For example, there is no real way of keeping track if you've already moved a unit. This could have been easily resolved with chit that you can flip over, but I can see why they wouldn't want to use chits, because for most people, chits means it's a heavy war game, and that might scare off a lot of the non-war gamers. There was also the treaty mechanic, which I thought was a little awkward, because there is that potential that you could be forced to play a treaty card if it's your only movement card in your hand, and end the game in a way that's not favorable to you. I understand that's part of the mechanic. It's supposed to be that, okay, later in the game you're kind of running out of options. If it's near your end of your deck, you might draw that treaty card and no longer have options anymore. But you could also draw the treaty card as your only movement at the very beginning of the game, which means if that happens to happen to both factions on a side, it forces them into knowing that they only have the 5th round to win the game. Granted, that is an edge case. I think the chances of that happening are relatively low, but it's still a possibility that I thought worth mentioning. It's definitely more approachable than your average war game. There's a lot of interesting strategy, short-term planning as well as long-term planning that goes into this game. Initially, okay, the Vikings can only come from the North Sea. English also have the issue of their units are generating kind of all over the board in small numbers, and it's going to be challenging them to get them anywhere that's going to really matter. So I think this is a really great game for war gamers who want to give a gentle introduction to the world of wargaming to somebody who isn't necessarily that prolific in this type of game. It definitely broadens their potential prey group. Well, that's my thought on 878 Vikings. Hope you enjoyed and watch again. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to check us out on other social media such as Instagram and Facebook. And don't forget to like and subscribe.